So continuing our conversation about original sin, why did God allow this to happen? That's one of the questions that is often brought up. Again, I would stress that I think that there are the other models of disease and the legal penalty have their place, especially in the disease. We'll come back to this in a little while. There's something about that model that's helpful. But the most helpful model, in my opinion, is the idea that we were, Adam and Eve were created to be millionaires, right? They were given all this, like spiritually speaking, all this grace. And then I always think about, somebody going to a casino and, maybe you were supposed to inherit millions and millions of dollars, but your father goes to the casino and puts it all on the roulette wheel and loses it in one go. And so none of that inheritance is ever going to come to you. That's kind of what happened with our parents. We were supposed to receive all of this grace, and it just can't get to us because they lost it. And so Jesus has to come and restore that to us. Well, why would God allow that to happen in the first place? If God loves us, it doesn't seem fair that I should have to suffer for a decision made by my ancestors so many, centuries ago. By the way, let me just say right now that you'll hear me talk about Adam and Eve and the fall. That Catholic theologians, we don't necessarily believe that those accounts are historical in the way that, if you read a book about Civil War history or something, in the same way. Adam and Eve, those names aren't actually names in Hebrew. Adam means man. Eve is a name that Adam gives to his wife when they leave the garden because she's to be the mother of all the living. And Chava, Eve, means life. It sounds like the word for life. But it probably the best way to think of that story is as a mythic account explaining why life is the way it is. What we do have to believe about that story is not that it's a historical record of why things are the way they are, but we do have to believe that it tells us something about that, something that happened at the very beginning of human history. So if God, and I believe this is the case, God created the human form over a long process of evolution, and at the moment when the first human being, properly speaking, and this could be even before Homo sapiens, in my opinion, but when the first human being with the Imago Dei that we talked about, the image of God in the last module, when that human being was created, that human pair made a choice. Instead of to obey God, who had given them the Imago Dei, they chose to follow their own desires, and they sinned, and that had a consequence for all of history that followed. Okay? The story of the fall in the garden is very helpful because it puts everything in a very, very vivid and easy to understand. It's easy to grasp what's happening in that story. So we're going to talk about it as though it's history, even though we recognize it's probably more mythic, but it's still a very helpful way of thinking it. So why did God allow this to happen? Why did he allow our first parents to sin in the first place with these dreadful consequences? For me, the most satisfying answer, and nothing is completely satisfying, but the most satisfying answer. So the problem of evil, why does God allow bad things to happen? There's no really great answer for this, okay? No one can say, God does this so that, okay? No one can answer that. But God's answer to that is to actually suffer with us. And that is what I hold on to. But something else that does sort of satisfy this is from the Easter Vigil liturgy. So every Easter, you should go to one of these sometime. So on Saturday night before Easter Sunday, there is a night service in the Catholic Church, and the church is completely dark. And while the church is dark, a fire is lit, usually in the foyer, and a huge candle is lit and is carried into the church. And then everyone, all the faithful, have little candles that they light from that large candle. And then the big candle is brought up to the front of the church, and the deacon or the priest sings this long song. It's called the Exultet, praising God for the wonders of the Easter season. But part of this talks about the fall of Adam and Eve, and I want to read that now. It says, "Our birth would have been no gain had we not been redeemed. O wonder of your humble care for us. O love, O charity beyond all telling, to ransom a slave you gave away your son. O truly necessary sin of Adam, destroyed completely by the death of Christ. O happy fault," in the original Latin that is Felix culpa. O happy fault that earned so great, so glorious a Redeemer. So one of the answers for why God allows sin is so that he can actually redeem us from that sin. And the church fathers speculate that if Adam and Eve had not sinned, then the incarnation would not have followed. God would not have become part of the human family. And so it's actually, our status now after the fall is actually greater than it would have been before the fall, because now to save us, God actually enters into the human race.